Welcome to Personality Crisis. I am Dylan Riss, your host for this episode. If you joined us last time, you had the distinct pleasure of listening to my discussion with Etan Nechin, the New York correspondent for Haaretz, which is Israel's oldest daily newspaper. And Etan has graciously agreed to join us for a follow-up episode. Welcome back, Etan.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Yes. So on our last episode, you were telling us, about how, from a bird's eye view, we got to this juncture in Israeli politics, going back to the mid '90s, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, who you described as almost a Franz Ferdinand character in terms of what his assassination would kick off, and for much of the ensuing 2.5 decades, or 3 decades,
3 decades.
Netanyahu has been on the scene and has been prime minister for, I think, 17 of those years, you said, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to, in this episode, talk about America's role in all of this, because Netanyahu himself is almost an honorary American. He spent so much time here, educated here, has some personal relationships with American politicians that go beyond that border on just pure friendship. So, what should our listeners know about starting with Netanyahu himself, his history in the United States?
Well, um, he grew up here partially in the States, and then he went and did his service and went back to the States. Was educated here, worked here, then he became representative at the UN for Israel before moving back to Israel and becoming the head of the Likud party. So he has deep ties to the United States, not only to politicians, but also American ideology, American, shall I say, Republican ideology. Very influenced, like economically, by somebody like Milton Friedman. And in the early 2000s, he actually kind of created this very deregulated society that was, Israel was founded by socialists, and there was a welfare, a lot of companies were a state. So he really kind of rushed Israel into this hyper-capitalist place from where it was. And that we were also seeing with his accent, his demeanor. I mean, while he was here, he took lesson with a famous speech and acting coach that would coach American politicians. So he's very polished. And when he came onto the scene, it was a contrast to these old socialist labor leaders or generals who, aren't very articulate. And he was very polished, and he was very driven. Kind of a very first type of career politician Israel had, with very right-wing ideology stemming from his family. Big supporters of the greater Israel vision of war with Iran, and of a kind of a constant battle between Israel and the Muslim world.
And during this 3-decade Netanyahu era, I think one of the most dramatic shifts in the American-Israeli relationship that has really been accelerated since October 7th, 2023, is that Israel was one of the most bipartisan American issues, where they are our allies, we support them, we give them money, weapons, and part of the people had their different reasons for that. They had there were Jews who felt obviously a kinship. There were evangelical Christians who had some whatever doomsday biblical prophecies, but nonetheless they were supportive of Israel. And then you had plenty of people who weren't religious in any way, but just said, well, Israel is the the stable democracy in the middle of the Middle East. They're a natural strategic ally, and we sort of going from like even a Cold War ideology. It's like we want to support, true democracy wherever it may exist, whoever, irrespective of religion. And in the past 3 decades, and especially in the past 3 years, Israel has become a cause of the American right, and the American left, Jewish or otherwise, is conflicted at best, if not
Yeah,
outwardly hostile.
yeah. I mean, this is a long-term process. It's I think we're seeing it's actually backfiring. Part of Netanyahu's goal and strategy in the past decade or decade and a half. He was prime minister from 96 to 99 during the Oslo period, during Clinton. He publicly played along, but he, sabotaged a lot of what Rabin was working towards. Then after the failure of the peace agreements, Sharon came up with finance minister, where Israel kind of became more kind of hardline right, but still a liberal democracy. It was speaking about the merits of the judicial courts in Israel. In 2009, when we returned to office under Obama, he gave a Bar Ilan speech, a famous speech where he spoke about two states. But since then, I think he read the map and saw where, what would end up with Trump and kind of the nationalist retreats in America and in Europe, and basically turned Israel into a partisan issue within American politics. And that was publicly displayed in 2015, where he went to Congress behind Obama's back to speak against the Iran nuclear deal. This not only created kind of shock tremors in Washington, but also in Jewish communities in America. Suddenly, Jews have to decide whether there are, with or without Netanyahu, with or against Netanyahu. This is also with evangelical Christians, who has fostered, he and the right, and especially the settler right, fostered a relationship with over, evangelicals seeing Israel as a fulfillment of prophecy, and using these communities to bolster support, not for Israel per se, but for the Israeli right and for the Israeli settlement project. So there's a strategy to make the term pro-Israel mean pro-Israel right, mean pro-Netanyahu. And he did this for his short-term ambitions. What we're seeing now, if I would have said that will be almost unanimous agreement that America should stop military aid to Israel, an agreement that was signed under Obama and a decade ago, I thought that would be crazy. But today, across the board, Republican and Democrats, they all agree the U.S. should stop funding Israel's military, defense. And we're seeing that displayed across, we're going to have the midterms soon. We're seeing this in primaries all across the United States, from Michigan to New York to New Jersey. Israel has become an issue that comes up in every debate. First, are you going to take AIPAC money? AIPAC, which was, seemed like a very neutral kind of Israel lobby, had become associated with kind of hardline right, and anybody who's just, criticized Israel is sure to have AIPAC money against them. Now we're seeing a rejection of that, not only by, left-wing politicians, but mainstream and mainline Democrats and even Republicans
Some on
and
the
we're
far
seeing
right, yeah, Tucker
some. I
Carlson.
mean, Tucker Carlson with that's. I think that's also the Israeli right's collaboration with the American far right for their own nationalist ambitions. We saw that after the Tree of Life massacre, or after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where neo-Nazis marched to Charlottesville, and Netanyahu basically said nothing. He basically said nothing about after January 6th. This was a wink and nod to the American far right that, you know, we'll work with you as long as you give support to the Israeli far right. We're seeing that backfiring with people like Tucker Carlson.
Yes, and it seems it's remarkable how much he's willing, and the far right is willing to play with fire, whether it's with those far right people or with, you look at where the American support from religious communities come, they're hemorrhaging support from Jews, but gaining it from evangelical Christians who have a apocalyptic vision of what's going to
But
happen to Jews.
but even now, I mean, I've written about it in their polling.
Yeah.
We're seeing, American evangelicals, young American evangelicals, are first and foremost young Americans, and they're seeing what's happening in Gaza, in the region. They're seeing settler attacks on churches in the West Bank. They're seeing the idea of bombing churches in Gaza. They're seeing a soldier smashing a figure of Jesus in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And they're contending with their parents that this is a theology we're backing. So there's splinters with even in the evangelical, traditionally very pro-Israel base, and we're seeing now the right and Netanyahu trying to kind of minimize, the fallout. We're seeing that in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, right? Netanyahu, the prime minister of a sovereign state, coming out to say that Israel has had nothing to do with the assassination because this was rife in the American far right. I think Netanyahu has put himself and Israel in this position that Israel is a wedge issue. And, after 3 years of war, and especially after these two, wars with Iran past June and this April, Americans reject it outright. Right. And after 3 years of war and, two wars with Iran that led by American Israel in June and this past April, Americans are rejecting it outright.
And so then how do you see that in your own reporting? You're a New York correspondent, but we see how perhaps Netanyahu and his leadership are reacting to this. Is there any shift in sentiment in among the general public in Israel about this schism with America that seems to be happening
For Israelis, you mean?
for
Um,
Israelis? Yeah.
yeah, I think, beyond Netanyahu's very devoted base, anybody with eyes seeing Israel's, degrading internationally. They might see, they might criticize as anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, but it's there, and we're seeing when far right ministers are quoted in by American officials, when we're seeing images of settlers in the West Bank doing pogroms against Palestinians on CNN and international media. I think Israelis understand well that under the right, Israel has been degraded very much in the international eye.
You yourself have been living in the United States for over a decade, and there's a community of Israeli expats. I know some personally, had one as a roommate, who who may have made a choice to take their lives elsewhere. I don't know if your own personal migration was at all related to politics or purely just to work opportunities, but there are people who have chosen to leave.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I for me, it's with a mix of both. Kind of also because of my political leanings and also my personal situation politically. You kind of feel there is no room for you in Israeli society, so kind of leave and migrate, and then I think for Israeli expat community, there are two types. A lot of types that are there for better opportunity economically, like any migrant, society. And with the America, it's easier than from other countries to migrate to. The opportunities are greater. There's an affinity between the countries. And then there's a class of Israeli expat who, again, not outright dissidents or not outright targeted, but people who feel like they have less and less room in this society that are becoming more right wing and more religious. And many of them don't even think about, oh, this is I'm an immigrant. I'm migrating for good, but they just kind of linger in these places. And we're seeing that, over the past 3 years in New York, there has been a weekly vigils since October 7th of Israelis, anti-occupation and peace activists, week after week, organizing in Union Square vigil that have seen the likes of, former comptroller who's now running for Congress, Brad Lander, or Mayor Zohar Mamdani attending these vigils. I think as Israel becomes more contentious on the political sphere, these voices have also become a bit more prominent and a bit more organized in New York and around the country.
Yeah, and obviously some of it would be anecdotal, but you, I'm sure, have observed things like what you're describing in New York, or just shifts in people's attitudes. We can also just see that some of the Americans who are speaking out against the regime in Israel are themselves Jewish. Brad Lander is Jewish. He's got a very good chance of winning a district in New York that's I don't know what the exact breakdown is, but it's one of the more Jewish districts in the country.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, the most prominent American Jewish politician, very critical of right-wing governance in Israel, and you see this among Jewish governors, senators, etc. So, is there either based on your reporting or just knowledge of Israel, are there people who we've talked about all the supporters in the U.S. and elsewhere that they've lost? Are there supporters that they're gaining for the first time, or not as much?
Supporter of Israel?
Yes, people who perhaps were at least neutral and now have become more pro-Israel.
Oh, I think that's since October 7th. There's been very vocal, very aggressive contingency that has responded very aggressively to any criticism of what Israel is doing. There is framing it under rise of anti-Semitism, which has risen in the past years, even before October 7th. They have been much more vocal, they have been much more aggressive, and they actually managed to pass changes in even legislation in New York and elsewhere, around higher education and a kind of a backlash to the protests, around restriction around protests, and they have allies in Congress and they have allies in the White House, and they have been, a lot of them have been very well organized and very well funded. So there is a sense that, yes, there is a criticism of Israel, and people are turning away and even rejecting the idea that should have been a Jewish state. But I think almost equally there's a rise of a very, very aggressive, unflinching pro-Israel voice that, they will vote on that issue, regardless of any other issue.
So for everyone listening who is disappointed in the changes in Israel, who maybe were supporters, maybe they are personally Jewish, maybe they're not, but they just always regarded Israel as a positive cause, and they've seen a change. What are some things, some tangible things, realistic things that people who want to support Israel but are struggling to do so? What should they hope for in terms of internal Israeli affairs and the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
I think today, as I said, the Israeli left is very weakened by design, by legislation, by violence. Israeli civil society is degraded. So I think, again, that paradigm of Netanyahu, of pro-Israel is pro-Israeli right, pro-Netanyahu. I think that needs to change in American discourse. That means elevating voices from Israeli and Palestinian civil society. And that is also being very cognizant and suspicious of any American politician who says, I stand with Israel. Which Israel do you stand for, and for what aim, right? So, and this could be in your city council, this could be in your congressional district. Laws against criticizing Israel passing in Tennessee or in Arkansas. So this automatic or using Israel and using the war and the conflict for internal political American goals, I think more Americans are anyway seeing past this, but also it's something that I think going into the midterms, going to 2028, I think Americans really need to really be focused on, because I think Israel and Israeli society has almost reached a point where it cannot fix itself, and I think there needs to be a real push from America, which is still the hegemon, the world hegemon, and Israel's biggest ally, which means it also has the biggest leverage to make change, perhaps the case to force it on Israel.
So let me conclude by asking you this. Let's say that a Democrat, we don't know who, wins the 2028 presidential election, takes office January 20th, 2029. What should their position toward Israel be? Should it be cutting off all aid? Should it be conditioning aid on specific things? Should it be keeping policy the same, but working on a personal relationship to change things? What is your prescription for what a new president should do?
Well, I think it's happening organically. We're seeing some, with somebody like Gavin Newsom, who a couple of months ago said, if Israel goes the way it's going to be a full apartheid state, right? This is not a progressive left-wing politician. This is very establishment, very much a person who doesn't speak a sentence before seeing the poll on it, right? I think that's where, very tight to business. I think that's where American society is going anyway. What I like to see, so the memorandum of understanding will be ending in 2028 for aid. I don't think it will be restarted automatically. I think that Netanyahu understand that. I think Israelis understand that. I think it should, in September, there was a summit at the UN led by France and Saudi Arabia recognizing two states, recognizing Palestine, and calling for a push for negotiations and ultimately two states. The UN outright rejected it. It was aggressive toward the Palestinian representatives. So even if the U.S. in September would co-sponsor, co-host this event, this summit, that would send a message to Israel that America, as its we're seeing Israel as image as this right-wing nationalistic country, which is not much more complicated, but we also have this kind of image of America as a neutral arbiter, right? Which hasn't been, perhaps even it wasn't true in the 90s, it's especially not true now, is ambassador like Mike Huckabee. So I think, a change in that attitude and for America, for the United States to explicitly state this is a goal and we are willing to, force Israel and people to achieve this. I think that would be, the ideal, most realistic step any Democratic or Republican president can have.
Yeah, even a Republican would presumably have a more coherent ideology than Trump currently has, which seems to be entirely based on his own self-interest and not
exactly.
Well, Etan Nechin, thank you so much for joining us on Personality Crisis. Your perspective as a reporter, as an Israeli, and as a New Yorker is pretty unique, and we're lucky to have heard from someone with your level of expertise. So thank you so much for being
Thank you very much.
Discussion. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
This is all for
Thank you.
Personality Crisis.